The world hates Israel. Want to know why? 2,000 years ago, there was a small nation called Judea who went to war against the mighty Roman Empire. The war between Rome and the Jews wasn't a single battle. It was a drawn-out confrontation spanning nearly 70 years. And at its core, it was a spiritual war and not a political one. The most defining phase was the First Jewish-Roman War, from 66 to 73 CE. That was the Great Revolt, the one that ended with the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and the fall of Masada in 73. But that wasn't the end. The Jews rose again in the Kitos War from 115 to 117, and then, in the most devastating of all, the Bar Kokhba Revolt from 132 to 136 CE. Rome faced such fierce resistance from the Jews that Emperor Hadrian sent Quintus Lollius Urbicus at first. But that wasn't enough, so he made an extraordinary move. He recalled Gaius Julius Severus, the governor of Britannia, who was then one of Rome's top field commanders. Severus had been fighting the northern tribes in Britain and was considered one of the best generals in the empire. Hadrian pulled him out of Britain with 12 legions to crush the Jews. Ancient historian Dio Cassius wrote that the Romans didn't even dare to fight the Jews in open battle anymore. The Jews were so fierce that the Romans had to defer to a war of attrition, starvation, and scorched earth tactics, as they couldn't win using traditional warfare tactics. He wrote in his codex Roman History, Book 69, Chapter 12,
"The Jews would leap out of their caves, rush upon the Romans with utter recklessness and inflict great harm upon them. They were found to be stronger than expected and not easily overcome."
He then wrote,
"Very few of them in fact survived. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease and fire was past finding out. Thus nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate."
That's how fierce and disciplined the Jewish resistance was under Shimon bar Kokhba. It was one of the largest troop concentrations ever sent to a single province. The war was so devastating that Hadrian didn't even use the formula "I and the legions are well" in his official reports, a sign of how badly the empire bled. After 70 years of war against the Jews, Rome won, but in great price. And something lingered, a mental humiliation defeat for Rome. The war didn't cost only money, over 3 billion sestertii, 3 full years of total Roman net income, but a great spiritual cost as well. And this changed the world forever, and the entire world was now introduced to the Jew for the first time. The Jews believed in one invisible almighty God. They refused emperor worship. They rejected every Roman god, and had no other law but the Torah, which meant they couldn't be absorbed or bought. Their rebellion wasn't strategic. It was a divine battle to reclaim sovereignty. It wasn't rational, it was prophetic. They didn't fight to lose, they fought to stay true. Rome could burn their cities, destroy their temple, kill their leaders, and the Jews just kept rising. They fought with an intensity that made no sense to Roman minds. And when they finally lost, they still didn't surrender. They mourned, fasted, remembered, and waited. And through all that, a new leader sprung from among the Jews, a man from Nazareth who led a spiritual revolution. And that terrified Rome, because it exposed something Rome couldn't defeat with swords: spirit, conviction, covenant, a real God. Not Roman idols. The very thing that held the Jews together was what made them ungovernable. That's why Rome didn't just conquer Judea. It had to erase it, its memory, its faith, its blood, and its new offspring faith, the Nazarenes. After the bloody quenching of the Bar Kokhba revolt and the crucifixion of Jesus and all his followers, Rome renamed the land. Judea became Syria Palestina, not because it was accurate, but because it was insulting. The Romans chose the name of the Philistines, Israel's ancient enemy, to wipe out the memory of Jewish sovereignty. They banned Jews from entering Jerusalem. They built a pagan temple on the site of the destroyed Hebrew temple. They outlawed circumcision, burned Torah scrolls. But still, the Jews refused to die. Give up or give in. Later, Christianity burned Rome to the ground. So Rome decided to do the unimaginable, a first and only act of its kind in human history, If you can't kill the Jews, Rome must dehumanize them. If you cannot kill their bodies, Rome will kill their memory. And from that moment on, Jews were marked as less than animals in every corner of Rome, not considered human, no civil rights, no legitimacy, only a symbol of how a rebellious nation is brought to its knees by Rome, to be despised forever. Rome eventually fell, but the hate it manufactured continued on, as the entire world until this day based its ideology under the shadow of Rome, from religion to politics to architecture. And so the hate passed on into Christianity, which changed as a part of the erasure process from being a messianic child of Judaism into a Jew-hating pagan faith. It was appropriated by Islam, and this hate invented by the Romans to avenge their ancient humiliation by a small tribe in the arse end of their empire lives until today. But something else happened with what the Romans did. Instead of destroying the Jews, instead of making them disappear, the Romans made the Jews famous and infamous. As what the Romans didn't take into consideration was the godly promise to Abraham to curse all those who curse his nation.
And I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed through you.
Rome fell and new empires rose instead, and with time, tactics, religion and politics changed, and the world became different, except for the Jews. But suddenly things flipped, because the Jews were not allowed to own land or businesses, so they turned to money lending, and now the Jews were owed money. They rose from slavery to be the invisible owners of their former Roman masters. And they started to regain their place through a different system. Rome might have disappeared and its shadow remained, but Jews now started to break free of it politically. Throughout modern recorded history, Jews were not considered human. It became the default way of the world, and the world was not willing to give that up. In fact, it still doesn't, as we see from the satanic trolls in the world who cling to Jew hatred from social media to world politics. The war Rome waged on the Jews defined the psychological development of modern civilization. It also defined Islam, as Islam adopted the Roman hatred to its simplistic desert style of life through the Western civilizations it conquered. This is why Jews lived as legal ghosts across most of Europe and the Islamic world. Jews were denied land, professions, education, and the right to exist on equal footing. Even today, Jews are ousted all over the world whenever it is possible. In 1791, revolutionary France became the first state to grant Jews full legal rights, but it came with a catch. Drop your Jewish identity, assimilate, become Frenchmen of the Mosaic persuasion. It wasn't real acceptance. It was conditional citizenship. With the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, we finally see something like an international recognition of Jewish rights. Clauses written into minority treaties protecting Jews in newly drawn Eastern European states. That was the first time the world legally acknowledged Jews as a group deserving rights. It was the first time a Jew received a certificate of humanity after almost 2,000 years. But less than 20 years later, those treaties were as good as ash. The world refused to let the Jew free. Only after the Holocaust, only after 6 million were turned to smoke, and the horror of Auschwitz, the world was briefly convinced the Jews finally deserve human rights. And even that didn't last, as the world realized it made a mistake, because by freeing the Jews, the world admitted the last 2,000 years were a lie. But it was now too late. It was 1948, and suddenly Israel rose back from the ashes like a phoenix. Until that moment, the Jew was a temporary useful guest, a despised specimen, a museum piece of suffering, a scapegoat for torment, for hate. Now Israel changed the story. Israel said, "We no longer need your permission." The world hasn't caught up, because the world has been programmed to Jew hatred for 2,000 years, systemically, theologically, and culturally. And that programming doesn't disappear in a heartbeat. Not from the world, not even from some Jews. In Christian theology, the Jew killed God. He's cursed, blind, destined to wander. That's St. Augustine, that's Thomas Aquinas, that's the Gospels. In Islam, Jews are described in the Quran as apes and pigs. They are dhimis, inferior, subjugated, taxed for existing. The Hadiths promise an end-times massacre of the Jews. And in secular Europe, where God was replaced with reason, Voltaire called Jews a barbarous, greedy people. Marx called them money-obsessed parasites. Even liberals found new pseudo-scientific ways to cast Jews as racially impure. Deicide gave way to degeneration. Same poison, modern words. Even now, the institutions that claim moral high ground continue to recycle ancient contempt. The UN obsessively condemns Jewish self-defense. Academia paints Jews as white colonialists. The media sanitizes Jew hatred and rebrands it as criticism of Israel. Because deep down, they cannot accept Jews being free. The Jew is the most convenient scapegoat, and its freedom means accountability the world is not willing to own. All the libels about Jews are now at stake. Blame the Jew for everything. Capitalism, Jew. Communism, Jew. Banking, Jew. Media, Jew. Wars, Jew. And now even a Nazi Jew. It's all Roman muscle memory. And it doesn't care whether you're left or right. It just wants a Jew to blame. And Israel is the world's ultimate system error. Suddenly the Jew has a flag, has an army, builds cities, Pause defends his borders, kills before being killed. The world simply cannot handle that, because it never expected the Jew to survive, let alone win. But this is also why the world can't accept Israel's existence, and that includes many diaspora Jews, because they too were raised inside a world that taught them, subtly or bluntly, that they are lesser, like a beaten street dog. Even in safe, liberal democracies, diaspora Jews were taught, blend in, don't cause trouble, be the model minority, don't act too Jewish. Now Israel stands like a mirror they can't look into. It says, you don't need to ask for permission anymore. So instead of embracing it, they project onto it. They say Israel makes us unsafe. They say Israel doesn't represent us. They say Zionism is racism. But what they really mean is, we're still waiting for Rome to accept us. We are more comfortable serving as dhimmis. The longer you live as a tolerated minority, the more you internalize your own dehumanization. You start to think sovereignty is aggression. You confuse victimhood with virtue. You believe safety comes from silence, not strength. That's why many diaspora Jews can't love Israel, because Israel is the cure for their illness. But they're completely addicted to the sickness, unlike their Zionist brothers and sisters who are free. Israel is the world's problem. We are not cursed, we are not dead, not enslaved. It rehumanizes the Jew by giving him back his land, by giving him back his sword, and by giving him a future free of servitude of anyone but God. And that, more than any war, border, or political debate, is what the world and many Jews cannot tolerate. Because Israel is not just a country, it's a rebuke to 2,000 years of learned weakness, and weakness is comfortable. And if you who see this video can understand this, you're decades ahead of where most people are willing to look. And to all you non-Jews who watch this video through to the end, no matter what your reasons were, I want you to look in the mirror and tell me in the comments, what is the first thing that comes into your mind when I say the word Jew? The answer defines who you are. Because we are the mirror of your soul.